7 minutes. That was the span of time medicine had declared impossible. The human brain begins to die after 4 minutes without oxygen. After 6 minutes, most doctors would simply shake their heads and write 2 words in the chart: too late. But on a storm-torn night in September, as the raging wind hurled savage waves against the seawall of Biscayne Bay in Miami, every law of biology seemed to fall suddenly still. A woman with chestnut brown hair drenched by the rain, with forged papers shoved hastily into her pocket, plunged into the black water below and pulled out not just one body, but 2 lives. She had no idea that the woman she had just wrestled back from the hands of death was carrying a child, 6 months along. She didn't know that this woman was the biological sister of the most powerful mafia boss in the state of Florida, a man whose name alone made the world of organized crime bow its head, Caruso. And she couldn't possibly have imagined that her own ex-husband, the man she was fleeing across 3 states, was the very federal prosecutor trying with all his might to put that family behind bars. Fate has a strange sense of humor. It pushes together people who should never have crossed paths, then sits back and watches as they write the story of their own lives. This is the story of how a victim became a hero without ever meaning to be one, of how a fugitive, a woman who had lost everything, found the one thing she had never truly had, a real family, of how the word famiglia, engraved on a silver bracelet, became a promise to protect her when the whole world had turned its back. But before there is light, there is always darkness, and the darkness of Brooke Sinclair began 72 hours before that fateful night. If this story touched your heart, please tap like and share it so more people can hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next deeply emotional stories. The penthouse on the 42nd floor looked out over the Chicago skyline like a fortress suspended in the night sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city lights, creating the illusion of luxury and freedom. But for Brooke Sinclair, this place had never once been home. It was a gilded cage. She sat on the edge of the bed in the master bedroom, her hands tightly woven together, her eyes fixed on the clock on the wall. 11:43 at night. Preston would be home at any moment. Federal parties usually ended around this hour, and she knew exactly what kind of state her husband would return in. Drunk. Not drunk enough to stagger, but just drunk enough to strip away the mask of the respectable prosecutor and reveal the man beneath it. 5 years earlier, Brooke had met Preston Hale at a charity fundraiser downtown. She had been 23 then, freshly graduated with a degree in physical therapy, still struggling to find her footing in life. Preston had appeared like a knight in a perfectly tailored 3-piece suit. 33 years old, the youngest federal prosecutor in the history of the Chicago office, with a smile that could have melted ice. He said he would protect her, that he would take care of everything for her. She had been innocent enough to believe that was love. She didn't know that to Preston, protection and control meant the same thing. The sound of the private elevator pulled Brooke back to the present. She heard the heavy footsteps on the oak floor, the thud of a leather briefcase tossed onto the sofa. Then the bedroom door swung open. Preston stood there, his tie loosened, his eyes red with whiskey. But it wasn't the alcohol that made the hair rise on Brooke's neck. It was the stack of papers in his hand. Her bank statements. "What did you promise me, Brooke?" Preston's voice wasn't loud. It was even softer than usual. That was what made it most terrifying. He never shouted when he was truly angry. "You lied to me. $1,000. Every month. Sent to that junkie in California." Preston moved closer, each footstep sounding like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. "Keith is my brother. He's trying to get clean. I just wanted to help." Brooke didn't get to finish. Preston's hand clamped around her wrist and twisted until the pain forced her to her knees. He dragged her into the dressing room, shoved her inside, then slammed the door shut. The electronic lock clicked with a dry, final sound. "You'll stay here until I decide what to do with you. 48 hours. Brooke stayed inside that windowless room for 48 hours. With nothing but a bottle of water and a few protein bars, the housekeeper slipped through the crack beneath the door. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears a long time ago. Instead, she made a plan. On the 3rd day, Preston left on a 2-day business trip to Washington. Before going, he opened the door and looked at Brooke the way a man might look at a broken possession. "When I get back, we're going to have a serious conversation about your future." The door closed. The helicopter on the rooftop roared, then faded into the distance. Brooke waited another hour, just to be certain. Then she began to act. She cried out that her stomach hurt terribly, twisting on the floor until the housekeeper panicked and opened the door. The glass of water she handed the woman had already been laced with 2 sleeping pills. 15 minutes later, the housekeeper was fast asleep on the sofa. Brooke didn't waste a second. She went into Preston's study, the one room she had never been allowed to enter. Using a code she'd long ago memorized in secret, she opened the drawer. She found a small black USB drive. She didn't know what was on it. She only knew. Preston guarded it as if his life depended on it, and anything that mattered that much to him could become a weapon for her. She slipped the USB between the pages of a book in her handbag, took the cash she had hidden inside a box of sanitary pads beneath the sink, and stepped into the elevator. When the steel doors slid shut, Brooke looked at her reflection in the mirrored wall. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The face was pale, the eyes hollow, but inside them was something she had thought she'd lost long ago. Resolve. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to get as far away as possible before Preston realized she was gone. Brooke didn't call a taxi through an app. She knew Preston could access anything tied to her name, from credit cards to phone records. Instead, she walked 7 city blocks through the cold Chicago night until she found an old-fashioned yellow cab idling outside a 3-star hotel. Cash. No questions. No names. The Greyhound bus station on the edge of the city was her first destination. From there, she bought a ticket to Indianapolis with small bills and coins, then took a seat in the very back. The brim of her baseball cap pulled low to hide her face. For the entire 4-hour ride, she didn't sleep. Every time the bus stopped to pick up passengers, her heart clenched as if some invisible hand were squeezing it shut. Preston would discover she was missing by morning. He would lose his mind. And with the power of a federal prosecutor behind him, he could set the whole system in motion to find her. Indianapolis greeted Brooke with a gray dawn and a thin, stubborn rain that seemed to cling to everything. She made her way to a used car lot at the edge of town, where secondhand vehicles stood in rows like old animals waiting for someone to take them home. There was an older Honda CR-V, its silver-gray paint faded, but the engine still running strong. The owner of the lot was an elderly Mexican man who didn't ask many questions when Brooke counted out each bill and placed the cash on the table. No paperwork. No official registration. Just the keys. And then she was gone. Brooke didn't head straight south. She knew that would be Preston's first guess. Instead, she drove north, crossing into Minnesota, then curved back down through Iowa and cut across Missouri. Each state became another layer of cover. Each mile placed one more measure of safety between her and the nightmare named Preston Hale. But distance on a map couldn't erase fear. On the long, empty stretches of highway, every police car that appeared in the rearview mirror made Brooke swallow down a burst of panic. Every pair of headlights trailing too long behind her became Preston's ghost. She ate at gas stations, slept in her car in deserted Walmart parking lots, and washed up in public restrooms. She looked like a homeless woman, and that suited the plan perfectly. On the second day, in a small town in Tennessee, Brooke pulled over beside a junkyard. Among the stacked skeletons of rusting cars, she found an old sedan with its license plate still attached. She removed the plate from her own car and replaced it with the one from the abandoned vehicle, a federal felony. She knew that. But between prison and going back to Preston, she chose the risk. Mississippi received her with the damp, heavy heat of the South and a payphone standing outside a weathered gas station. Brooke remained there for 10 minutes before she found the courage to lift the receiver. She had memorized the number of the rehabilitation center in California long ago. 3 rings. Then a familiar voice came through. "Is that you, sis?" Keith sounded stronger than he had the last time they spoke. Her brother's voice no longer trembled. It no longer carried the exhaustion of someone still fighting the grip of addiction. "Are you doing okay?" Brooke tried to keep her voice steady. "I heard you're almost finished with the program. Just 2 more weeks. But sis, where are you calling from? This number's strange. Is Preston home?" Brooke closed her eyes. She wanted to tell Keith everything. About the years of hell. About the locked room. About this frantic and desperate escape. But she couldn't. Keith was healing. He needed peace, not another burden. "I'm going to be okay, Keith. I just wanted to hear your voice. But you have to promise me one thing." "What is it?" "Don't look for me. And if Preston asks, you don't know anything. You haven't spoken to me. You don't know where I am. Do you understand?" Silence stretched between them. Then Keith's voice came again, lower now, filled with worry. "What did he do to you?" Brooke hung up before the tears could fall. She stood there for a few more minutes, her forehead resting against the cold receiver, forcing herself to breathe until the ache in her chest eased. Then she went back to the car and kept driving. On the third day, Florida, the state line appeared just as the sun was sinking, staining the sky a burning orange before it quickly darkened into deep violet. The radio in the car kept repeating warnings about a tropical storm moving toward the waters off Miami. Residents were being advised to stay indoors. Coastal roads might be closed. Brooke should have stopped, found a cheap motel, and waited for the storm to pass. But her fear of Preston was greater than her fear of nature. She kept driving south, toward Miami, toward the storm. 11:30 that night, the Palm Island Bridge emerged through the rain like a narrow strip of concrete suspended above an abyss. On either side were deep canals, black water churning in violent swells. The wind came in savage gusts, strong enough to shake the Honda like a dry leaf. The rain didn't seem to fall at all. It flew sideways, slamming against the windshield like millions of tiny stones. Brooke tightened both hands around the steering wheel, her eyes straining to see through the wall of water. She could see nothing beyond 30 feet ahead. This was a mistake. She knew it was a mistake, but it was too late to turn back. Suddenly, headlights from behind pierced the darkness. Brooke looked into the rearview mirror, her heart breaking into a wild, panicked rhythm. 3 black Escalades with dark-tinted windows were coming up behind her in a tight formation, moving like a military escort. The lead vehicle flashed its lights. Instinctively, Brooke shifted into the slower lane and gave way. The 3 SUVs swept past her like enormous ghosts. For one brief instant, through the rain-streaked glass of the middle vehicle, Brooke caught sight of a small figure in the back seat. A young woman, her hand resting on the full curve of her belly. Pregnant. The convoy vanished into the rain ahead. Brooke kept going across the bridge, struggling to hold the car steady against the violent blasts of wind. She didn't know who the people in that convoy were. She didn't need to know. All she wanted was to get across this bridge, find shelter, and survive the night. But fate had other plans. 200 meters ahead, the 3 Escalades suddenly slowed. Their brake lights flared red through the rain like the glowing eyes of demons. And from the opposite direction, a truck came hurtling forward. No headlights, no horn, only a massive block of metal tearing through the darkness at a speed meant to kill. 3 seconds. That was all it took. Just 3 seconds. Yet to Brooke, time seemed to stretch into something endless. Each instant burned into her vision like a slow-motion reel from hell. In the first second, the truck with no headlights slammed straight into the lead Escalade at a horrifying speed. The sound of metal crushing metal rose like the roar of some monstrous beast tearing its prey apart. The front of the truck rammed into the side of the SUV and sent it spinning 90 degrees, sparks exploding through the rain like fireworks lit by death itself. In the second Escalade hit the brakes hard, but the road slick with rain betrayed every effort to regain control. The vehicle fishtailed, tipped onto one side, then rolled over and slid across its roof, with the shrill scream of steel grinding against concrete. A trail of sparks stretched out for 20 meters, like the slash of a giant blade carved across the bridge. In the third second, the last Escalade, the one carrying the pregnant woman, had no time to react. It was flung sideways by the chain reaction of the crash, spinning like a toy top that had lost all control. The side of the vehicle smashed into the steel guardrail with devastating force. The guardrail gave way, and the SUV plunged into the night, vanishing into the darkness of the deep canal below. Brooke slammed on the brakes with both feet. The Honda spun 90 degrees and skidded across the wet pavement, 30 meters. She felt every yard beneath the tires as though her own body were being dragged across the road. The car came to a stop 50 meters from the wreckage, its nose pointed straight toward the broken guardrail. Silence, for the briefest fraction of a moment. Then chaos exploded. Doors flew open. Men poured out from the 2 remaining Escalades, dark figures moving with frightening speed despite their injuries. They didn't look like ordinary victims of a traffic accident. Black suits, expensive shirts, and in the hands of more than one of them, pistols glinting beneath the headlights. Brooke understood at once. These weren't businessmen or politicians. This was the Mafia. A shout in Italian tore through the storm. Gianna, Gianna. One man lunged toward the shattered guardrail. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the force of a wounded animal. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, staining half his face red, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes looked in only one direction, the black abyss below. My sister's down there, he shouted in English, his voice roughened by despair. Let me go. Let me get down there. Two other men were trying to hold him back, gripping his arms and shoulders, stopping him from jumping. You can't, boss. The water's churning. You'll die. I don't care. That's Gianna. That's my sister. He fought against them, nearly throwing both men aside. The strength in his desperation was terrifying. Brooke sat frozen in the car, both hands still clamped around the steering wheel until her knuckles had gone white. Her heart was pounding wildly, not because of the crash itself, but because of the cold clarity of what she was seeing. This was the Mafia. These were men who killed without hesitation. If she got involved, if they saw her face, if they remembered her life would never be peaceful again. Reason screamed inside her head. Go, drive away now. You're running from your husband. You can't let anyone know you were here. This isn't your fight. But her eyes couldn't leave the man who was shouting into the storm. The pain in his voice touched something buried deep inside her. She knew that feeling. She knew what it meant to be terrified of losing someone you loved. She knew what helplessness felt like. Then movement flickered at the edge of her vision. The truck door burst open, and the driver jumped out. But instead of running toward the victims, he turned and ran the other way, disappearing into the darkness with the speed of a man who had planned this long before it happened. Brooke blinked. No driver ran after causing a wreck like that. Not unless it hadn't been an accident at all. Not unless this was an assassination. The thought flashed through her mind and was gone just as quickly, because another image had taken hold of everything inside her. The pregnant woman in the SUV that had gone over the edge. She was down there, in the freezing water, in the dark, drowning, with her child still inside her. Brooke turned off the engine. Her hand reached for the door handle. Reason screamed at her one last time. You're out of your mind. You're going to die. Even a state-level swimmer would fear these waves. You're on the run. But there was another voice, smaller, deeper, rising from the farthest hidden place in her soul, whispering, There's a mother and a child dying down there. If you leave, you'll never forgive yourself. You may go on living, but guilt will hollow you out until there's nothing left. Brooke opened the car door. Wind and rain crashed into her like nature's own slap, as though the storm itself were shouting in her face, asking if she was certain. She was. She didn't know what she would be able to do. She didn't know whether she would survive, but she knew she couldn't sit there and watch another woman die when there was still a chance to save her. For the last 4 years, she had been a helpless victim. Tonight, she would be something else. Brooke ran toward the broken guardrail, toward the men shouting in Italian, toward the black abyss that was swallowing a human life, or perhaps two. Brooke ran toward the shattered guardrail, shoving past the men who were shouting in Italian. She looked down, and her heart seemed to stop for one terrible beat. 50 feet below, the black canal was heaving violently beneath the storm. The water had no color at all, only the thick and lightless black of spilled ink swallowing everything. But there, about 100 feet from the bank, a ghostly glow flickered beneath the surface. The headlights of the Escalade were still burning, shining upward from the depths like the eyes of a monster sinking slowly into hell. The vehicle was going under, slowly, but without mercy. And then Brooke saw the thing that stole the breath from her lungs. A hand, small and pale, thrashing in the black water, not waving, but pleading. The pregnant woman was still alive, but not for much longer. Around Brooke, the Mafia men were frantically searching for a way down to the canal bank. But the slope was nearly vertical, slick with rain and covered in jagged rocks. One man had already tried to climb down and lost his footing, nearly pitching headfirst into a boulder before someone managed to drag him back. Expensive leather shoes and perfectly tailored suits were not made for climbing or for swimming through a storm. Who the hell are you? A hand seized Brooke by the shoulder and spun her around. A huge man with a hard face and suspicion blazing in his eyes stared at her. What do you want here? Are you part of this? Brooke didn't answer. She didn't have time to explain who she was. A woman running from an abusive husband, someone trying to disappear, someone with no place in this world. Instead, her eyes swept quickly over the terrain, with the instinct of a woman who had once been a state-level swimmer in college. The canal bank was steep, but there was a rock ledge jutting out about 15 feet below. The water was deep, but there was no major whirlpool. The distance from the ledge to the sinking SUV was about 80 feet. Hard, but not impossible. In Brooke's mind, the image of Keith flashed like lightning, her brother lying on the bathroom floor, lips turned blue from an overdose. She had performed CPR for 10 unbroken minutes until the ambulance arrived. Keith had lived because she didn't walk away. Keith had lived because she refused to give up. Brooke tore off her jacket and threw it to the ground. Then her shoes, bare feet against the freezing concrete. The man who had been shouting Gianna's name turned, and his crazed eyes locked onto Brooke. Blood was still running from the wound on his forehead, staining one side of his face red, but he didn't seem to notice. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice was hoarse, splintered by despair. Brooke looked straight into his eyes. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he did for a living, how many people he had killed, or why someone wanted his sister dead. She knew only one thing. In those bloodshot eyes lived the agony of a man about to lose the person he loved most in the world. "I'm going to save your sister." Then Brooke ran, not down the slope the others had tried to climb. She ran along what was left of the guardrail, to the point where the rock ledge came closest to the water, 50 feet. She had dived from 30 feet in competition before, another 20 feet, in a storm, into freezing water, toward a sinking vehicle and a pregnant woman who was drowning. Reason screamed that this was suicide, but Brooke had stopped listening to reason. She jumped, 50 feet of free fall through wind and rain. The world became a blur of darkness, water, and the shriek of wind in her ears like nature itself crying out. Then she hit the water. The impact felt like 1,000 needles driving through her skin all at once. Cold. Cold that numbed. Cold so brutal she almost opened her mouth to scream and swallowed the canal whole. Brooke sank 10 feet before survival instinct took over. Her legs kicked hard, her arms cut through the water, and she drove herself back toward the surface. Waves slammed her toward the rocky bank, trying to drag her away from the target, but Brooke had been a swimmer. She knew how to read the current. She knew how to cut across the water at an angle so the waves couldn't carry her off. She swam toward the fading glow, toward the vehicle sinking inch by inch into the dark. Her lungs began to burn. Her muscles started screaming from the cold and the strain, but she didn't stop. The light grew closer. Then Brooke dove beneath the surface. Darkness wrapped around her like a black shroud. The freezing water pressed against her ears. She swam toward the headlights, toward the dim outline of the SUV tilting farther and farther down, and then she saw her. Through the side window, a pair of eyes were staring straight at her. The eyes of the pregnant woman, wide with terror and yet still full of hope. She was conscious. She was alive, and she was looking at Brooke as though Brooke were an angel who had fallen from the sky to save her. The Escalade was sinking faster than Brooke had thought. Beneath the water, the headlights flickered wildly, as though sending out one final signal for help before the battery gave out for good. Brooke swam toward the driver's side door, where Gianna was trapped. Through the glass, she saw the young woman trying to force the door open with both hands, but the pressure of the water outside was too great. The door didn't move at all. The water had already risen to Gianna's chest, and it was climbing higher with every passing second. Brooke pressed her hand against the window and motioned for Gianna to look at her. She tried to send the message through her eyes alone. "Stay calm. I'm going to save you. Don't panic." Gianna nodded, but her eyes were still swimming with fear. One hand clutched her swollen belly as though she were trying to shield her unborn child from the death that was closing in around them. Brooke tried the door. It wouldn't budge. The force of the water held it shut like the grip of some giant hand. She had to think fast. Every second slipping away was another second Gianna was losing. The rear window. Brooke swam around toward the back of the SUV, her lungs beginning to burn from the lack of oxygen. She had been right. The impact against the guardrail had shattered the rear window, leaving an opening wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But all around the edge of that opening were jagged shards of glass, sharp as sharks' teeth, glittering in the dimming light of the failing headlights. Brooke didn't hesitate. She forced herself through the broken opening. A shard sliced into her left arm, tearing a long gash from elbow to wrist. She knew she was bleeding. She knew the water around her was clouding into a faint red haze, but she felt no pain. Adrenaline was surging through her veins like live current, shutting down every sensation her body didn't need. Inside the vehicle, the water had already risen to Gianna's neck. She was crying, her tears lost in the bitter salt water. One hand still clung to her belly, while the other clawed desperately at the seatbelt latch. It was jammed. Brooke lunged toward her and tried to unfasten the belt. It wouldn't release. The mechanism had been damaged in the impact, or the water had ruined the electrical system. She needed something to cut it. Glass. Brooke turned back toward the shattered window and tore loose a large shard, big enough to grip in her hand. It was as sharp as a razor. She went back to Gianna and began sawing through the seatbelt with the edge of the glass. Then the headlights died. Darkness crashed down all at once, like a massive black curtain swallowing everything whole. Brooke couldn't see a thing anymore. She could only feel the seatbelt beneath her hand, feel the back and forth motion of sawing, feel the fibers giving way, one by one. Then at last, the belt snapped free. Gianna was loose. Brooke grabbed Gianna by the wrist and pulled her toward the broken rear window. Gianna clung to Brooke the way a drowning soul clings to life itself, her nails digging painfully into Brooke's skin. But Brooke didn't let go. The two of them squeezed through the opening just as the vehicle tilted completely and began its final descent toward the bottom of the canal. The current swirling around the SUV nearly dragged them down with it. Brooke kicked hard, wrenching them free from the pull. And that was when the real struggle began. The surface was above them, far above them. Brooke had no idea how long she had already been under. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, maybe more. Her lungs were burning. Every cell in her body was screaming for oxygen. And she was dragging a woman who was 6 months pregnant. Brooke kicked. One arm locked across Gianna's chest from behind, the other pulling through the water. It was the rescue technique she had learned back in college. But theory was one thing. Doing it in darkness, in freezing water, with lungs ready to burst, was something else entirely. Up, she told herself. Up, up. Her legs drove like pistons. Her thighs burned. Her calves cramped. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. A faint light appeared overhead. Dim, but still light. The surface. Brooke gathered every last shred of strength she had for one final kick. And then she broke through. Air, cold and soaked through with rain, but air all the same. Brooke opened her mouth and dragged it into her lungs, and her chest expanded as though she had just been raised from the dead. Gianna surfaced with her. She coughed violently, gagging up salt water, but she was breathing. She was alive, but they still weren't safe. The waves were still battering them hard, dragging them toward the jagged rocks along the bank. If they struck stone at that speed, they wouldn't survive it. Brooke adjusted her direction, cutting across the current instead of trying to fight against it head-on. She aimed for a flatter ledge of rock about 50 feet away. 50 feet, with a woman 6 months pregnant on her back, in the middle of a storm. With her body already spent after long minutes under the water, Brooke's legs began to cramp. First, her left calf, tightening in agony as though some cruel hand were crushing the muscle with pliers. Then her right thigh seized. She wanted to scream, but didn't dare open her mouth for fear of swallowing more water. Her arms were going numb. She couldn't even feel her fingers anymore. Her body was giving up on her one piece at a time, 20 feet more. Brooke had no idea where the strength came from. Maybe from the image of Keith on the bathroom floor all those years ago. Maybe from the memory of surviving 4 years trapped under Preston's control. Maybe from the look of hope in Gianna's eyes when she had seen Brooke appear beneath the water. Brooke refused to surrender. 10 feet. A wave slammed her into a boulder, but she twisted and took the blow on her own back, instead of letting it hit Gianna. Pain exploded through her. Maybe a broken rib. She didn't know. She didn't care. 5 feet. Brooke's hand struck the flat rock ledge. She grabbed hold and pulled herself up, pulled Gianna with her, inch by inch, until both of them were stretched across the rock, half their bodies still in the water, but their heads finally above it. Brooke was gasping, her chest aching as though it had been torn apart. She turned to look at Gianna, and her heart stopped. Gianna lay motionless. Her eyes were shut. Her lips were blue. Her chest wasn't rising. She wasn't breathing. Brooke didn't allow herself to think. She moved on instinct, on training etched into her from her years as a physical therapist. Lay Gianna flat on the smooth rock ledge. Tilt her head back to open the airway. Place both hands one over the other in the center of the chest, right over the breastbone. Then begin compressions. 30 chest compressions. 2 rescue breaths. Repeat. Brooke counted silently in her head to keep the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her arms were already screaming with exhaustion after that swim through death, but she didn't stop. 5, 6, 7. Gianna's chest sank beneath Brooke's pressure, then rose again. No response. 15, 16, 17. Gianna's lips were still blue. Her eyes were still closed. Her chest still didn't rise on its own. 1 minute passed. Nothing changed. Brooke gave 2 breaths into Gianna's mouth, then went back to compressions. 2 minutes. Rain lashed Brooke's face like an endless series of slaps, but she didn't feel it. She focused only on the count, on the rise and fall of her hands, on the fragile hope that this woman would open her eyes. 3 minutes. No response. A small voice inside Brooke's head whispered, "She's already dead. You failed. Give up." But Brooke had heard that voice before. 5 years earlier, when Keith had lain motionless on the bathroom floor. She hadn't listened to it then. She wasn't going to listen now. 4 minutes. A shout came down from above, cutting through the howl of the wind. Someone was climbing down the steep canal bank. Is she alive? Is she breathing? Brooke didn't look up, didn't answer. She had no breath to spare for words. No time for words. She just kept pressing. 28, 29, 30. Breathe, breathe, repeat. 5 minutes. Brooke's hands began to shake, not from the cold, but from sheer exhaustion. Her muscles had gone beyond their limit long ago, and now they were moving on nothing but raw will. But even will has its breaking point. 6 minutes. A shadow dropped down beside her. She caught sight of expensive leather shoes smeared with mud, black suit trousers soaked through. Then a face entered her field of vision. The man from the bridge. He had made it down. The blood from the wound on his forehead had been thinned by the rain, running in pale pink streaks down his cheek. His eyes were red, not from crying, but from despair. "Let me do it." His voice was hoarse and broken. "You're exhausted. Let me take over." Brooke shook her head without stopping the compressions. "I know what I'm doing," she said through ragged breaths. "Don't touch her." The man fell silent. He stepped back, but he didn't leave. He stayed on his knees there, watching his sister lying motionless, watching a strange woman fight to pull her back from the hands of death. 7 minutes. Brooke drove down one last time with every ounce of strength she had left. Her body was on the verge of collapsing. Her head spun from lack of oxygen. Her hands had gone numb. And then Gianna coughed. 1 weak cough, but a cough all the same. Water rushed from her mouth, from her nose. She rolled onto her side, choking and gasping, vomiting up seawater mixed with rain. She was breathing. She was alive. Gianna's eyes opened, clouded and confused. Her lips moved, trying to form words. Brooke had to lean close to hear them. "My baby." Gianna's voice was no more than a breath. "Is my baby alive?" Brooke placed a hand on Gianna's belly. She wasn't an obstetrician. She had no ultrasound machine, but she felt a faint movement beneath the skin. The baby was still kicking, alive. "Both of you are alive," Brooke said, not even knowing whether the wetness on her face was rain or tears. The man lunged forward and gathered his sister into his arms as though he feared she would vanish if he let go. He didn't say a word. He only held her tightly, his shoulders shaking in waves. Brooke sank down onto the rock ledge, with no strength left to stand or even remain on her knees. Her body trembled violently from the cold, from exhaustion, from the shock that comes when adrenaline finally begins to leave. Then the man lifted his head and looked at her. For the first time, they truly saw one another. No more chaos from the crash, no more madness from the rescue. Just 2 human beings, soaked through and spent, meeting each other's eyes in the dim light of the stormy night. His eyes were as dark as the bottom of an abyss, but in them, Brooke saw something she hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not the polite sort offered out of habit, but the purest gratitude of a man who had just been given back the most precious thing in his life. He rose and held out his hand to her. "You need medical attention." His voice was low and steady. "Your arm is bleeding. Come with me." Brooke looked at the hand extended toward her. The hand of the Mafia, the hand of the underworld. If she took that hand, she would be stepping into a world utterly unlike anything she had ever known. But what other choice did she have? She couldn't go back to Chicago. She had nowhere else to go, and she had just saved this man's sister's life. Brooke took his hand. Everything happened too fast for Brooke to react. An ambulance appeared out of the darkness as if summoned from nowhere. Not the usual white vehicle with the spinning lights of a public hospital, but a sleek black van with no markings on the outside. The rear doors flew open, and 2 people in medical uniforms rushed out carrying a stretcher and emergency equipment. They moved with the precision of a team trained to work under pressure, lifting Gianna onto the stretcher, while an older man with close-cropped silver hair began checking her vital signs. A private doctor. This family had a private doctor. Brooke stood there watching them load Gianna into the van, feeling painfully out of place among the crowd of men in black suits moving like a perfectly oiled machine. She didn't belong here. She needed to leave. Her Honda was still up on the bridge. If she could slip away now, while they were all still focused on Gianna, maybe they wouldn't notice. Brooke stepped back once, then twice, then a third time. She turned to run. A hand closed around her elbow from behind. "You're not going anywhere." The voice was low and cold as steel. Brooke turned to face the man holding her. He looked to be about 50, with salt and pepper hair combed neatly back, and a sharply cut face framed by eyes as hard as blades. There was nothing about him that suggested friendliness, or the possibility of negotiation. "You just saved the boss's sister," he said, his voice steady and without the slightest tremor. "Do you really think we'd let you walk away without knowing who you are?" "I'm just someone passing through," Brooke said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I have nothing to do with any of you. I just want to get back to my car and leave." He looked at her with the detached scrutiny of a man studying a specimen beneath glass. "You'll leave after we know who you are and why you were there." Then he motioned to two large men standing nearby. They moved to Brooke's side. They didn't touch her, but they stood close enough to make one thing perfectly clear. Running was no longer an option. Half an hour later, Brooke found herself standing on the deck of a luxury yacht, moored at someone's private dock on an island. The yacht was at least 50 meters long, with sleek lines and dark-tinted windows. Inside was a world of polished oak, cream-colored Italian leather, and paintings that Brooke was certain were worth more than the entire apartment she had once lived in. A middle-aged woman led her to a bedroom on the lower level. It was spacious, with a double bed dressed in crisp white sheets, a private bathroom with a marble tub. A set of dry clothes had already been laid out on the bed, and on the table sat a tray of hot food, luxurious, comfortable, and still a cage. Brooke noticed there was no lock on the bedroom door from the inside, but when she glanced into the hallway, a large man was standing there with his arms folded across his chest, staring straight ahead. He wasn't there to protect her. He was there to guard her. That night, Brooke didn't sleep. She stood by the round window looking out over Biscayne Bay, whose waters had turned calm again after the storm. The lights of the Miami skyline flickered far away like another universe, one she could see but never reach. She had run from Preston, from the penthouse, from 4 years of control and abuse. And now she was here, on a Mafia yacht, watched by men who were even more dangerous than her ex-husband. The irony of it almost made her laugh. The next morning, the silver-haired doctor from the night before appeared in her room. He introduced himself as Webb, only Webb, with no last name. He examined the wound on Brooke's arm, stitched it with 12 careful sutures, then wrapped it neatly with the precision of a surgeon who had done this 1,000 times before. "Gianna and the baby are both fine," he said as he packed away his instruments. "She's awake, and she's asking about the woman who saved her. You did something extraordinary, young lady. Not many people could have done what you did last night." Brooke didn't answer. She didn't want praise. She wanted freedom. That afternoon, the bedroom door opened, and the man from the bridge stepped inside, the one who had shouted Gianna's name in desperation, the one who had held his sister on the rock in the middle of the storm. But the man standing in front of Brooke now looked nothing like that broken figure from the night before. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a white shirt without a tie, and his black hair was combed neatly back. The wound on his forehead had been stitched and covered with a small bandage. He looked like the chief executive of a billion-dollar corporation, not a mafia boss. But his eyes gave him away. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "Who are you?" No greeting. No thanks. Just the question, fired like a bullet straight at her. Brooke had prepared for this moment. All through the night she had thought about what she would say. "My name is Sarah Miller," she said, her voice even and controlled. "I'm just someone who was on the way to Miami when I came across the accident. I saw someone needed help, so I helped. That's all." The man looked at her without speaking for several long seconds. Then he opened the leather briefcase in his hand, took out a file, and tossed it onto the table in front of Brooke. "You're lying." His voice held no emotion at all. Brooke looked down at the file. On the first page was a photograph of her, the photo from her real driver's license. Beneath it was her real name. Brooke Sinclair, and on the next page was another photograph. Preston, in a suit, standing in front of the federal courthouse, wearing the confident smile of a powerful man. "Your real name is Brooke Sinclair," the man said, his voice as cold as ice, "and your husband is Preston Hale, a federal prosecutor." Brooke stared at the file spread across the table and felt as though the ground beneath her feet had just given way. They had found everything. Not only her real name, but her old address, her former workplace, even her wedding photograph with Preston from 5 years earlier. In that picture, she was smiling, her face bright with the hope of a 23-year-old woman who believed she had found her prince. She didn't recognize that woman anymore. "Who sent you here?" the man across from her asked, his voice cold and even, as if he were asking about the weather. "No one," Brooke said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I already told you. I was just passing through. You're Preston Hale's wife," he cut in. "A federal prosecutor leading the campaign against my family. He spent the last 2 years trying to put me and everyone I love behind bars. And now you want me to believe that your appearance on the exact night my sister was nearly assassinated was nothing more than coincidence." Brooke blinked. Preston was prosecuting this family. The knowledge hit her like a blow. In 4 years of living with Preston, she had never known the details of the cases he was pursuing. He never spoke about work at home, and she had never been allowed to ask. "I didn't know," she said. And this time it was the truth. "I didn't know what Preston was doing. He never told me anything. He never let me know anything. He never let me do anything." "You expect me to believe," the man interrupted, "that a federal prosecutor never told his wife about the biggest case of his career?" "Yes," Brooke almost shouted. "Because he didn't see me as his wife. He saw me as property. Something to control. Something to display when it suited him. Something to break whenever he wanted." Silence fell over the room. The salt-and-pepper-haired man, Nico, who was standing near the door, lifted one brow ever so slightly. But the man across from her didn't change expression at all. He still looked at her the way a man studies a problem that needs solving, not a human being speaking from the deepest place of her pain. And something inside Brooke broke apart. 4 years. She had endured 4 years in silence. No one had believed her. No one had helped her. And now, even after she had risked her life to save this man's sister, he still didn't believe her. "You want the truth." Brooke's voice shook now, not from fear, but from anger. "Then here's the truth. My husband turned my life into hell for 4 years. He controlled everything I ate, everything I wore, everyone I saw. He hit me whenever I did something he didn't like. He locked me in a room for 2 days because I dared to send money to my brother. I ran because if I had stayed one more day, I would have died. Not because he would have killed me, but because I would have ended my own life just to escape him." She shot to her feet, the chair scraping backward with a harsh cry. "I don't know who you are. I don't know who your sister is. I only saw a pregnant woman about to drown, and I jumped because I couldn't stand there and watch another woman die when I might still do something to stop it. If you want to kill me for that, go ahead. At least that death would mean more than dying at Preston's hands." A heavy silence settled across the room. Brooke stood there, chest rising and falling hard, eyes red but dry. She had cried too much in the last 4 years. She had no tears left. The man across from her said nothing. He stood, walked to the window, and turned his back to her. "Nico, check her neck." The salt-and-pepper-haired man stepped closer to Brooke. He looked at her now with something that was no longer pure suspicion, but something else. "Would you pull your scarf down?" Brooke didn't understand why, but she obeyed. She tugged the collar lower, exposing the skin along her throat and chest. Nico looked, and for the first time, the controlled mask on his face changed. "There are old bruises," he said to the man standing by the window. "The shape is consistent with a man's hand, and there's a faint scar near the collarbone. This wasn't a one-time thing." Then Nico reached into his jacket and placed something on the table. The small black USB drive. "We found this among your things," Nico said. "Do you know what's on it?" Brooke looked at the drive. It was the one she had taken from Preston's locked drawer, the one she thought might serve as a weapon if she ever needed one. "I don't," she said honestly. "I only knew it mattered to Preston. I took it because I thought it might protect me if I had to defend myself." Nico looked toward the man at the window. "It contains proof of the bribes Preston Hale accepted from the Benedetto family." The man turned back and walked slowly toward the table. Benedetto, our enemies, the ones who tried to kill my sister last night, the wife of the federal prosecutor prosecuting my family, just saved my sister from an assassination attempt ordered by my enemies, and she's carrying evidence that could destroy both sides, her husband and Benedetto alike. He stopped and looked at Brooke with an expression she couldn't read. Either this is the most sophisticated scheme I've ever seen, or this is the most insane coincidence in history. I don't know who Benedetto is, Brooke said. I don't know who you are. I don't know anything. You don't need to, he cut in. You only need to understand that from this moment on, you'll stay here until I decide how to use this situation. You're not a prisoner, but you're not a guest, either. You're a chess piece, Brooke Sinclair. And I haven't yet decided which move to make. Brooke watched as the man walked out of the room, with Nico following behind him. The door closed with a soft click. She sank into the chair, her mind spinning. She had run from Preston, from 4 years of control and violence, and now she was trapped in the middle of a war between two dark powers, with a USB drive full of secrets that could destroy them both. She was no longer Preston's prisoner. She had become a piece on a board whose rules she didn't understand, and she had no idea which side was more dangerous. A week passed aboard the yacht, and Brooke learned to measure time by the smallest things. Breakfast at 7 o'clock. Dr. Webb arriving at 10 to change her bandages. Lunch at noon. Long afternoons that seemed endless, staring out at the bay through the round window. Dinner at 7. Then nights even longer than the days, filled with nightmares of Preston and the unanswered question that never stopped circling inside her. Where was he? And when would he figure out where she had gone? She was treated kindly in a strange, unsettling way. The food was good, the room was spotless, and no one gave her trouble. But the guard still stood outside her door 24 hours a day. She was still a prisoner. Only now she was a prisoner in a gilded cage. On the 8th day, the bedroom door opened, and Brooke almost didn't recognize the woman who stepped inside. Gianna Caruso looked nothing like the woman Brooke had pulled from the bottom of the canal. Her lips were no longer blue, and her skin no longer carried that dreadful pallor of oxygen loss. She had healthy, olive-toned skin now, long black hair brushed neatly into place, and dark eyes that studied Brooke with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. Her 6-month pregnant belly curved round and full beneath a loose cream-colored dress. "So you're the one who saved me," Gianna said, her voice warm, without the guarded edge her brother carried. "I've wanted to meet you for days, but the doctor wouldn't let me out of bed." Brooke didn't know what to say, so she only nodded. "Are you okay? I mean, the baby." Gianna smiled and rested a hand on her stomach. "Healthy. Kicking like crazy every night, like he's training for boxing. The doctor said if you'd been 2 minutes later, he wouldn't have made it. You saved 2 lives, you know that." Gianna walked to the chair across from Brooke and sat down without waiting to be invited. "My brother thinks you might be a spy," she said bluntly. "He thinks everything's a plot. That's how he's survived in this world. But I don't believe that." "Why?" Brooke asked. "Because no spy dives into black water to save a stranger." Gianna tilted her head as she looked at her. "A spy would have let me die, then approached my family as someone offering sympathy. That would have been the smart way. What you did, risking your own life for a woman you didn't know, that's either the act of a mad woman or the act of someone with a good heart. And I'm betting on the second." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Gianna asked, her voice softer now, "Tell me, about Preston. About what you've been through." Brooke wanted to refuse. She wasn't used to talking about it. For 4 years she had kept everything locked inside because there had been no one to tell, and because saying it out loud wouldn't have changed anything. But there was something in Gianna's eyes that made her speak. Maybe it was sincerity. Maybe it was the way Gianna didn't look at Brooke with pity, but with understanding. And so Brooke began to tell her about Preston, about the sweetness of his promises in the beginning, about how he had slowly cut her off from family and friends, about the beatings hidden in places no one would ever see, about the locked room and 48 hours without food, about the night she decided death would be kinder than staying. Gianna listened without interrupting. When Brooke finally fell silent, Gianna reached across and took her hand. Her hand was small, but warm. "My mother was like that too," Gianna said, her voice lowering. "She endured my father for a very long time. In the end, she couldn't bear it anymore, and she chose to leave when I was 10. She paused and drew in a slow breath. But you're different. You chose to live. You ran instead of giving up. That's what my mother couldn't do. And for that, I respect you." Gianna stood, still holding Brooke's hand. "I'm going to talk to Jace. You're not the enemy. You're this family's benefactor. And if Preston ever dares lay a hand on you again, he'll have to answer to my family." The next day, Brooke was moved from the yacht to the main mansion on Star Island. Her room now was 3 times larger, with wide windows overlooking the bay and a private balcony of its own. There was no longer a guard outside her door. She still wasn't allowed to leave the island, but she no longer felt like a prisoner. In the weeks that followed, Brooke discovered that Gianna had injured her leg in the crash. It wasn't severe, but it needed physical therapy for a full recovery. And when Gianna learned that Brooke had once worked as a physical therapist, she wouldn't let Brooke refuse. Every day, they spent 2 hours together. Brooke guided her through exercises, and Gianna worked through them while telling stories. About growing up inside a Mafia family, about a cold, distant brother who would still do anything to protect her. About the baby in her womb and the father who had died in a hit before he ever knew he was going to become one. Little by little, Brooke no longer felt like an outsider. Rumors about the woman who had saved Gianna spread through the family. One day, Bruno, the family's underboss, a man built like a bear with a face covered in scars, appeared at Brooke's door. "Heard you know how to fix back pain?" he grumbled. "I've had spine trouble for years. Doctors keep handing me painkillers. You got anything better?" Brooke began working with more people after that. Men with injuries whose origins she didn't ask about, with pain whose causes she didn't need to know. She simply treated them, and they began to look at her differently. By the 3rd month, Brooke was given a phone. Gianna handed her a new one and told her she could make one call. Just one. Brooke called Keith. Her brother's voice came through strong and clear, steadier than at any point she could remember. He had completed rehab. He had a new job at a center helping addicts in California, and he was worried about her. "Preston's looking for you everywhere," Keith said. "He's like a madman. Where are you? Are you safe?" Brooke smiled, the first real smile she had given in a very long time. "I'm somewhere safe. For the first time in a long time." Jace Caruso remained a shadow at the edge of Brooke's life. She rarely saw him. He was always busy with work, no one ever clearly explained. But sometimes, when she was outside in the garden helping Gianna with physical therapy, she would feel someone watching. She would look up and see him standing on the 2nd-floor balcony, observing in silence before turning away. One night, Brooke stood alone on the balcony outside her room, looking out over Biscayne Bay shimmering beneath the moonlight. She thought about Preston, about the penthouse in Chicago, about 4 years of hell. Then she thought about the last 3 months, about Gianna, about the frightening men who had somehow begun treating her like family, and she realized something strange. She didn't want to run anymore. For the first time in her life, she felt as though she belonged somewhere, even if that place was a Mafia stronghold. At the very moment Brooke stood on the balcony looking out over Biscayne Bay and feeling peace for the first time, more than 2,000 miles to the north, Preston Hale stood inside the Chicago penthouse and felt himself unraveling. 3 months. Brooke had been gone for 3 months without leaving behind a single trace. Preston had used every resource available to him. He had checked security cameras across the city. He had traced every credit card transaction and every bank account. He had contacted police departments in neighboring states under the authority of a federal prosecutor, searching for an important witness. Nothing. Brooke had vanished as though the earth itself had swallowed her whole. And what kept Preston awake every night was not only the fact that his wife had dared to run. It was what she had taken with her. He discovered the USB drive was missing the very first day he came home, and found the bed empty. It held proof of every bribe he had accepted over the previous 5 years. Names, dates, amounts, offshore accounts. Enough to destroy his career. Enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life. Brooke had to remain silent. Forever. Preston no longer wanted to bring her back. He wanted to make certain she would never have the chance to open her mouth. The lead came late one night, from a private investigator Preston had hired with cash. "Your wife is in Miami, and you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you." Preston sat up straight in his chair. "Tell me." "She's with the Caruso family." Preston felt as if someone had punched him in the chest. Caruso. Jace Caruso. The Mafia boss he had spent the last 2 years building a case against. His #1 enemy in the world of organized crime. And now his wife was inside that man's stronghold. How? Preston ground his teeth together. Why, it looks like she saved Caruso's sister in a car accident. Now she's living in his mansion on Star Island, protected like family. The investigator added more details, but Preston no longer heard a word. His mind was already spinning with a plan. He couldn't touch Brooke while she remained under Caruso's protection. He needed someone who could penetrate Caruso's territory without raising suspicion. He needed Caruso's enemy. A week later, Preston sat in an elegant Italian restaurant in Manhattan, across from Victor Benedetto, a 60-year-old man with pure white hair and the eyes of a venomous snake, the head of the Benedetto crime family, and Caruso's sworn enemy in a war over territory that had dragged on for decades. "What do you want, counselor?" Benedetto asked, his voice like gravel grinding together. "You're prosecuting us, yet here you are asking for a private meeting. Interesting." Preston placed Brooke's photograph on the table. "My wife is with Caruso. I want her back." Benedetto looked at the photograph, then back at Preston with a spark of amusement in his eyes. "I've heard about her. The woman who jumped into the canal to save Jace's sister. That story's been all over the streets." He gave a dry, amused laugh. "If we touch her, Caruso will declare war. And I've got no interest in opening another front right now." "I don't need you to touch her," Preston said slowly. "I just need you to create the opening that lets me touch her." Benedetto tilted his head, waiting. "You attack the Caruso estate as a distraction. While they're busy dealing with your people, I'll come in another way and take my wife. Caruso will never know you were involved beyond what he already suspects. He'll think it was simply another failed strike from you. And what do I get out of it?" Benedetto asked. Preston smiled. "I'm the man leading the case against you. I can make that file disappear. Permanently." Silence stretched between them. Benedetto lifted his glass of wine to his lips, took a slow sip, and never looked away from Preston. "She's your wife," he said at last. "And you have the right to bring her home. I understand that. We have a deal." 2 weeks later, in Miami, Gianna knocked on Brooke's bedroom door with a radiant smile. Her belly had grown rounder now, her 8th month of pregnancy already upon her. "This weekend is Marco's baby's christening," Gianna said. "You have to come. You're this family's good luck charm. Everyone wants to meet the woman who saved me." Brooke hesitated. She still wasn't comfortable with crowds, especially crowds made up of dangerous men, but she couldn't say no to Gianna. "I'll come," Brooke said with a smile. That morning, the Miami sky was a clear, unbroken blue. Brooke stood in front of the mirror in her room, wearing a dress for the first time since leaving Chicago. It was a pale blue dress, simple but elegant. Gianna had chosen it for her. She looked at the woman in the mirror and almost didn't recognize her. The deep hollows beneath her eyes from sleepless nights were gone. The constant fear had faded from her face. She looked peaceful. She looked happy. She didn't know that Preston was already on his way to Miami. She didn't know that Benedetto had deployed a team ready to strike. She didn't know that the real storm was about to arrive. The christening was held at an old Catholic church on the mainland, about 20 minutes by car from Star Island. Most of the Caruso family was there, from Jace in a solemn black suit to Bruno with the irritated look of a man forced into formal clothes. Along with dozens of men and women Brooke had gradually come to recognize over the last 3 months. Only Brooke and Gianna remained behind at the mansion. Gianna was too heavy and uncomfortable to move around much in the 8th month of her pregnancy, and Brooke had volunteered to stay and keep her company. 4 bodyguards stood watch around the estate. Star Island was already considered the safest place in Miami, with its own private security system and only one road leading in. No one thought anything could happen on a quiet Sunday like this. Brooke and Gianna were sitting in the first-floor living room, where the glass doors opened toward the pool and the distant sweep of Biscayne Bay. Gianna was talking about her plans for decorating the baby's room while Brooke listened and smiled. She had grown used to conversations like these. Ordinary moments she had never been allowed to have during the 4 years she lived with Preston. The clock showed 1 o'clock in the afternoon when the explosion came from the front gate. Brooke shot to her feet. Gunfire. Then more gunfire. Not 1 or 2 shots, but full bursts of automatic fire ripping apart the stillness of the midday air. Brooke ran to the window, and her heart seemed to stop. A group of men dressed in black were pouring through the shattered gate. They moved in military formation, guns in hand, firing at the 4 bodyguards who were trying to fight back. This wasn't a robbery. This was a coordinated assault. This was war. Gianna rushed into the room after the first shots, her face drained white with fear. "What's happening, Benedetto?" Brooke didn't know why she was suddenly so certain, but she was. This was the rival family Jace had once mentioned. The same ones who had tried to kill Gianna on the bridge 3 months earlier. "We have to go. Now." Brooke grabbed Gianna's hand. "Is there another way out?" "My brother's office," Gianna said, her voice trembling. "There's a secret tunnel that leads to the dock out back." The two women ran down the long hallway, the sound of gunfire drawing closer. Brooke could hear shouting in Italian, the crash of glass breaking, the pounding of feet. They were already inside the mansion. Jace's office was at the end of the corridor. Gianna ran to the massive oak bookcase, pulled on a false book, and the whole shelf slid aside to reveal a steel door. "You go first," Brooke said. "I'll be right behind you." "No," Gianna shook her head. "We go together. You saved me once. I'm not leaving you here alone." Brooke wanted to argue, but there was no time. She had just started toward the tunnel when the office door burst open. She turned, bracing herself to face the attackers in black. But the man who stepped inside wasn't wearing black. He was dressed in an expensive gray suit, white shirt, sandy blonde hair combed neatly back, and in his hand was a pistol aimed straight at Brooke. Preston Hale. "Hello, Brooke." Preston's voice was as sweet as poison. "I've missed you so much." Brooke stood frozen. Over the last 3 months, she had slowly begun to forget that face, that voice, the fear he inspired in her. But now it all came crashing back like a tidal wave. Preston stood there in Jace Caruso's office as though he belonged in the room. He stepped farther inside, his eyes sweeping over the space before stopping on Gianna, who was trembling beside the tunnel door. "So this must be Caruso's sister," Preston said with a smile. "The one my wife risked her life to save. Interesting. She has nothing to do with this." Brooke stepped forward, placing herself between Preston and Gianna. "Get out. She's pregnant. You can't hurt her." Preston laughed, and the sound was cold as ice. "I don't care about her. I only care about you. 3 months, Brooke. I searched for you everywhere, and all this time you were here, living like a queen in the house of criminals. You don't even need me anymore, do you?" The gun in Preston's hand lifted higher, aimed directly at Brooke's chest. Behind her, Gianna moved. She was about to do something, maybe run or reach for a phone. Brooke didn't know, and she didn't dare turn to look. "Don't move, pregnant lady," Preston said, his voice sharp as a blade. "One more step and I'll shoot my wife right in front of you." Gianna stopped, but then she did something none of them expected. She lunged forward, trying to shove Preston with the full weight of her 8-month pregnant body. Preston reacted instantly and threw her back. She hit the hardwood floor with a sickening sound, both hands flying to her stomach, her face twisting in pain. "Gianna," Brooke cried out and dropped to her knees beside her. Gianna lay there gasping, her hands clutched tight over her swollen belly. Preston stepped forward, seized Brooke by the hair, and yanked her to her feet. White, hot pain shot through her scalp. Brooke wanted to scream, but she bit it back. "Enough," Preston snarled. "We're leaving. Right now." "Wait," Brooke said, forcing her voice to stay calm even though her heart was pounding like a drum. "I'll go with you. No resistance. But leave her here. She's 8 months pregnant, and she just fell. She needs help. If you drag me out of here right now and she dies, Caruso will hunt you to the ends of hell." Preston hesitated. Brooke could see him weighing the risk. In that single moment, she knelt beside Gianna one last time, as though checking whether she was all right. And while her hand touched Gianna's shoulder, she slipped the USB into the pocket of Gianna's dress. The USB she had carried on her all this time like a final hidden card. "I trust you," Brooke whispered, low enough for only Gianna to hear. Then she rose and turned back to Preston. "Let's go." Preston grabbed Brooke by the arm and hauled her toward the door. Gunfire was still echoing somewhere in the mansion, though it sounded farther away now. Benedetto's plan was working. Brooke went with Preston without looking back, even when she heard Gianna call her name in a voice full of pain and desperation. She didn't dare turn around, because if she did, she wouldn't have the strength to do what she was doing. And if Preston discovered that the USB was gone, he would go back and kill Gianna without a second thought. Preston dragged Brooke across the garden behind the mansion, through the tall palms and over the perfectly trimmed lawn. Ahead of them, the gunfire still rang out like a funeral hymn. Benedetto was doing his job well, keeping everyone distracted. The Caruso family's private dock came into view. A white speedboat was already waiting there, engine running, with a man seated at the wheel. This had been Preston's plan from the beginning. Get into the mansion during the chaos, take Brooke, and disappear out on the water before anyone could react. Get on the boat. Preston shoved Brooke toward the dock as he gave the order. What are you going to do with me? Brooke asked, forcing her voice to stay calm, even though her heart was beating wildly. Preston smiled. That smile she had seen hundreds of times before, the smile that always came right before he did something cruel. You're going home, back to Chicago, back to our penthouse. And this time, I'm going to make sure you never get another chance to run. You'll stay there forever, Brooke. Until I decide otherwise. Preston's hand tightened around Brooke's arm. The same familiar strength. The strength that had crushed her for 4 long years, had made her shrink into herself like a wounded animal. The strength that had once made her believe she would never escape. But she wasn't that woman anymore. For the past 3 months, she had lived. Not merely survived, but truly lived. She had leaped into black water to save a stranger. She had learned how to stand straight and meet another person's eyes without fear. She had remembered who she had been before Preston, a strong woman. A woman who knew how to fight. And there was one more thing. Preston had forced her to take self-defense classes 2 years earlier. He had said it was so she could protect herself when he wasn't home. In truth, it had only been another way to control her time, to know exactly where she was 3 evenings a week. But she had learned, and she had remembered. The irony of it was about to become her weapon. Preston shoved her toward the steps leading down to the dock. Move. We don't have much time. Brooke took a few steps. Then she stumbled. Or at least, that was what Preston believed he saw. She fell forward, one knee hitting the wooden planks, her hands catching herself against the ground. Preston gave an irritated sigh and bent down to haul her back up. That was when Brooke turned. Her elbow drove straight into Preston's face, with every ounce of force she could summon. Bone struck bone. Preston staggered backward, one hand flying to his nose as blood spilled through his fingers. The gun in his other hand clattered onto the dock. Brooke lunged for it. Her fingers brushed the freezing metal. But Preston was faster. His foot slammed into her back, driving her down against the planks. Then his full weight crashed over her, heavy and brutal. You think you can fight me? Preston snarled, his face red with fury, blood from his nose streaking down. You think living with the Mafia for a few months turned you into some kind of warrior? His hand closed around Brooke's throat and squeezed. Brooke couldn't breathe. Her vision began to blur, black spots dancing before her eyes. She could feel life draining out of her, second by second. Was this how it ended? After everything she had survived, dying under Preston's hands on someone else's dock? No. Brooke's hand groped blindly along the wood. Her fingers closed around something hard, a decorative stone. Small, but heavy enough. She grabbed it, and with the last strength she had, she smashed it into Preston's head. Once. His grip loosened. Twice. He rolled away. Brooke twisted out from under him, choking and gasping, dragging air into her lungs as if she had been raised from the dead. Preston lay there for a few seconds, stunned. Then he pushed himself up, his eyes burning red with rage. He found the gun, picked it up, and aimed it at Brooke. I told you already. His voice was cold as ice. You can't beat me. Never. The gunshot cracked through the air, but it didn't come from Preston's weapon. Preston jerked violently, his eyes widening in shock. He looked down at his left shoulder, where blood was spreading across the expensive gray fabric of his suit. Then he fell, and the gun dropped from his hand again. Brooke turned her head. At the far end of the dock stood Jace Caruso. Smoke still curled from the barrel of the gun in his hand. He was still wearing the black suit from the christening, but his shirt was half unbuttoned now, and there was blood on one wrist. He had fought his way back here. Jace walked forward, kicked Preston's gun farther away, then stood over the man groaning on the dock. He raised his weapon and aimed it straight at Preston's head. No, Brooke shouted, her voice raw from the crushing grip that had nearly closed off her throat. Don't kill him. Jace didn't look back at her. His eyes stayed fixed on Preston. He almost killed you. He broke into my house. He threatened my sister. Give me one reason not to pull the trigger right now. Brooke pushed herself up, staggering toward Jace, because if you kill him, I'll never truly be free. Her voice shook, but her words were firm. He'll die as a victim. No one will ever know he was a monster. I need him to stand trial. I need the world to know what he is. I need people to hear what he did to me. That's the only way I'll ever really escape him." Jace was silent. His finger still rested on the trigger. Brooke could see the struggle written across his face. The instinct of a Mafia boss wanted to finish his enemy on the spot, but something else was holding him back. Then, slowly, Jace lowered the gun. Footsteps sounded behind them. Brooke turned and saw Gianna coming toward them, one hand cradling her belly, the other holding something small and black. "The USB drive. I have this," Gianna said, her voice still trembling from pain and fear. "The evidence you gave me, enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life." She handed the drive to Jace. He looked at it, then at Brooke, then down at Preston lying on the dock and groaning in pain. "All right," Jace said at last. "We'll do it your way. Preston Hale will stand trial, and he'll rot in prison until the last day of his life." The Benedetto attack ended almost as quickly as it had begun. When Jace and his men returned from the church, the attackers realized they had walked straight into a trap. They no longer had the element of surprise. They no longer had the advantage in numbers. Retreat was the only choice left to them. The Caruso family lost 2 men in the firefight. 2 men Brooke had once stitched up with her own hands while listening to them talk about their families. She stood there watching as their bodies were carried out, and she felt that some part of this new world had been changed forever. Preston Hale was tied up and locked in the mansion's wine cellar. The cellar, with its priceless bottles and perfectly controlled temperature, had become a temporary prison for the federal prosecutor who had once been the terror of all Chicago. Jace went down there alone. He stood there, looking at Preston sitting on the cold concrete floor, his shoulder still bandaged from the gunshot wound, his eyes full of hatred and yet just as full of fear. "You thought you could walk into my house," Jace said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "Touch my sister, take one of my people, and I wouldn't do anything about it. I'm a federal prosecutor," Preston snarled through clenched teeth. "If you kill me, the FBI will hunt you to the ends of hell." Jace tilted his head, as though weighing a business proposal. "Who said I was going to kill you? There are things worse than death, Preston Hale, and you're about to experience one of them." That same night, a black sedan with no plates rolled up to the gate of the mansion. The woman who stepped out was a small Asian woman in her 40s, dressed in a gray suit and low heels. But her eyes were sharp as knives, and the way she moved made it clear she was no ordinary woman. Special Agent Monica Chen, FBI. The one person in the system Preston had never been able to buy, because she hated men who abused their wives more than anything else in the world. She looked at Preston sitting in the wine cellar with a cold, satisfied expression. "Preston Hale," she said, "I've suspected you for a long time. Your cases were too easy. The people you prosecuted were always the rivals of certain families. But I never had proof. Until now." She lifted the USB drive and the printed file containing the security footage from the mansion. Preston storming into the office. Preston shoving Gianna to the floor. Preston dragging Brooke away, clear as daylight. Enough to end your career and your life. 3 months later, the trial began in federal court in Chicago. The press descended like vultures scenting a corpse. The star prosecutor unmasked. The man who was supposed to defend justice revealed as a criminal. It was too irresistible a story for anyone to ignore. Brooke sat in the witness chair wearing the simple blue dress Gianna had chosen for her. She told everything. 4 years of abuse. The nights locked in a room. The beatings in places no one would ever see. The escape. And the kidnapping. Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't fill with tears. She simply told the truth, one detail after another, as if she were reading a report about someone else's life. Keith flew in from California to testify as well. Her brother stood in court healthy and sober, speaking about how Preston had used him like a hostage to control his sister, about the times Preston threatened to cut off rehab money if Brooke didn't obey, about how both brother and sister had been trapped in different cages by the same man. The charges piled up one on top of another: bribery from organized crime, conspiracy with the Mafia, domestic abuse, kidnapping, assault causing bodily harm, breaking and entering. Each charge was another brick in the wall that would lock Preston Hale away until the end of his life. Life in prison without parole. The judge read the sentence in a voice as emotionless as if he were reading from a menu. Preston stood there, pale as ash, his body trembling. He turned and looked at Brooke one last time before they led him away. In his eyes was pure hatred. But Brooke wasn't afraid anymore. She only looked back at him with empty calm. He had no power over her now. Brooke remained seated as the courtroom slowly emptied around her. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed. For the first time in years, she breathed without fear. Outside the courthouse, Jace Caruso was waiting beside a gleaming black car. He hadn't gone inside during the trial. That wasn't his world, but he was here. "Are you all right?" he asked when Brooke stepped outside. Brooke looked up at the Chicago sky, at the city she had once believed would become her grave. Now it was only another city. Nothing more. "I don't know what all right means anymore," she said honestly, "but I think I'll figure it out. Little by little." Jace nodded. He opened the car door for her and said nothing more. Brooke looked at the car, then at Jace, then back at the courthouse behind her. She could go anywhere now. She was free, truly free for the first time in 5 years, and she stepped into the car. Not because she was forced, not because she had no other choice, but because she chose to. 2 years later, spring in Miami. The Star Island mansion glowed beneath the April sun, adorned with white flowers everywhere and silver ribbons drifting softly in the sea breeze. Classical music floated from a small orchestra set in the garden, blending with the gentle sound of waves brushing against the seawall in the distance. Today was Marcus's christening, the son of Gianna, the child Brooke had saved while he was still in his mother's womb at the bottom of that canal 2 years earlier. Now Marcus was nearly 2 years old, with dark eyes like his mother's, and a dimpled smile that had enchanted the entire family. Brooke stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down at the garden as more guests slowly gathered below. She was no longer the panicked woman fleeing across 3 states. Nor was she the stranger taken in because of a life debt. Now she was Brooke Sinclair, the woman who managed the legal real estate branch of the Caruso family. Boutique hotels, fine dining restaurants, rental properties stretching along the Miami coast. All of it passed through her hands for contracts, oversight, and management. Legitimate work, steady income, a life she had never dared to imagine for herself. And she had a home of her own, a small penthouse apartment on the edge of the island, overlooking Biscayne Bay. A gift from Jace on her birthday last year. "You need your own space," he had said when he handed her the keys. "A place that belongs only to you, not to the family, and not to anyone else. This is your home, Brooke. Truly your home." A knock on the door brought Brooke back to the present. Gianna stepped inside, radiant in a cream-white dress, carrying Marcus as he squirmed in his bright white christening outfit. "Are you ready? Everyone's waiting." Brooke smiled and followed Gianna downstairs into the garden. A small altar had been arranged beneath the branches of an old banyan tree, where the priest stood waiting in his ceremonial robes. Around it were familiar faces. Bruno, with his bear-like frame, still looked annoyed in a suit, though his eyes softened with affection whenever he looked at the baby. Nico stood behind him, his hair now completely white, though his back was still as straight as steel. Dr. Webb sat in the front row, a gentle smile resting on his aged face, and Keith. Brooke's brother stood near the family row, taller and healthier than the last time they had seen each other at the trial. He had moved to Miami 6 months earlier, and now worked at a local rehabilitation center, helping people fight addiction just as he himself once had. The christening unfolded with solemn warmth. When the ceremony was over, Gianna stepped forward before the altar, still holding Marcus in her arms. "I want to say a few words," she began, her voice carrying through the quiet air. "This is Marcus, my son. But his full name is Marcus Brooks Caruso. His middle name was given to honor the woman who saved both my life and his 2 years ago." Brooke felt as though someone had struck her squarely in the chest. She hadn't known about this. She looked at Gianna, her eyes already beginning to sting. "Brooke Sinclair wasn't part of our family when she jumped into that black water that night," Gianna continued. "She was a stranger. A woman on the run. A woman with nothing and no one. She was in the middle of saving herself. She could have kept driving, and no one would have blamed her. But she didn't. She jumped into that black water to save a stranger who was pregnant. She risked her own life for someone she didn't know. That isn't the act of a stranger. That is the act of family." Gianna looked straight at Brooke, tears shimmering at the corners of her eyes. "You gave my son the chance to live. You gave me the chance to become a mother. And now my son will carry your name for the rest of his life as a reminder of that gift." Jace Caruso stepped forward to stand beside his sister. In his hand was a small black velvet box. "We don't trust outsiders easily," Jace said, his voice low and steady. "That's how we survive in this world. But you proved that you aren't an outsider. Not with words, but with actions. With blood. He opened the box. Inside was a gleaming silver bracelet, finely engraved with a single word. Famiglia. You don't belong to any one of us, Jace said, looking straight into Brooke's eyes. You belong to all of us. This is your home, Brooke Sinclair. If you want it to be. Brooke stepped forward, her legs trembling faintly beneath her. She held out her hand, and Jace fastened the bracelet around her wrist. The metal was cool against her skin, fitting perfectly as though it had been made just for her. Because it had been made just for her, the whole family began to applaud. Not loudly, not like a celebration bursting into chaos, but with a quiet dignity and warmth. The applause of some of the most dangerous people in Florida welcoming a new member into their fold. Gianna threw her arms around Brooke, with Marcus caught between them, laughing happily. Welcome home, she whispered. Brooke hugged her back, and at last the tears began to fall. But these tears were nothing like the ones she had once cried inside that Chicago penthouse. These were tears of happiness. When they finally pulled apart, Brooke looked down at the bracelet on her wrist. Famiglia. Family. She thought of Preston, of 4 years of hell, of the locked room and the endless nights of fear. Then she looked around. Gianna was smiling with Marcus in her arms. Keith stood nearby, winking at his sister. Bruno was wiping at his eyes awkwardly, while denying he had been crying at all. And Jace stood a little farther back, leaning against the trunk of the banyan tree, watching her with the faintest smile on his lips. For the first time in her life, Brooke Sinclair understood what it meant to belong somewhere. Not because she was forced to be there, not because she had no other choice, but because she wanted to be there, with these people, in this family. Night fell over Star Island with a beauty that never stopped astonishing Brooke. She stood on the balcony of the mansion, looking out across Biscayne Bay, shimmering beneath the moonlight, like millions of diamonds scattered over black water. This was the very same water. This was the very same bay. 2 years earlier, she had leaped into it to save a stranger. Now she stood here with the silver bracelet engraved with the word Famiglia resting against her wrist, looking down at the place that had nearly become the grave of both her and Gianna. Soft footsteps sounded behind her. Gianna came to stand beside Brooke, Marcus asleep in her arms, his head resting against his mother's shoulder. What are you thinking about? Brooke didn't turn around. Her eyes remained fixed on the bay. I'm thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night. Then you wouldn't be here. Brooke gave a faint shake of her head. No. Then I'd still be running. Still afraid. Still alone. I would have been alive, but I wouldn't have truly been living. I would have only been existing, one day at a time, until Preston found me, or until I grew too tired to keep running. Gianna said nothing. She simply stood beside Brooke in silence. Marcus stirred in his sleep, his lips moving faintly as though he were dreaming something sweet. Another set of footsteps sounded. Keith stepped out onto the balcony, a glass of water in his hand. Jace asked me to see if you wanted to go home. He's waiting downstairs. Brooke smiled. Tell him I'll be down in a minute. Keith turned as if to leave, then stopped. He looked at his sister with an expression Brooke had never seen in his eyes before. You know something. I'm proud of you. You did the thing I used to believe was impossible. You got out. You lived. Not just survived, but truly lived. I used to think both of us were going to stay trapped forever. Me in addiction. You in that marriage. But looking at you now, I believe anyone can change their fate. Brooke stepped forward and hugged her brother. No words were needed, just the embrace and the quiet understanding that both of them had traveled a very long road to reach this place. When Keith went back inside, Brooke turned to Gianna. You know what? I think I finally understand. Understand what? Why I jumped that night. Brooke looked down at the bracelet on her wrist. Not because I was brave. I wasn't brave at all. It was because at that moment, I had nothing left to lose. I had already lost everything. My identity, my freedom, my faith in myself. Jumping into that black water didn't feel like risking my life. It felt like the only meaningful thing I could still do. Brooke lifted her gaze back to Biscayne Bay, moonlight reflected in her eyes. But now it's different. Now I have everything to protect. I have you, and Marcus, and Keith, and this family. If someone fell into that bay now, I'd still jump in after them. But this time it would be harder, because I would have to fight to come back. Because now I have reasons to return. Gianna smiled and squeezed Brooke's hand before carrying Marcus back inside. Brooke remained there a moment longer, breathing in the salt-touched air, then made her way downstairs. The gleaming black car was waiting at the front gate. Jace stood beside it, leaning against the frame with his hands in his pockets. When he saw Brooke, he straightened and opened the door for her. Going home. Brooke looked into the car, then turned back to the brightly lit mansion behind her. Laughter drifted out from inside. Keith was waving through the window. Gianna was rocking Marcus in the hallway. Bruno was arguing with Nico about something that almost certainly didn't matter. Home, Brooke answered, and stepped into the car. Brooke Sinclair's story was not a fairy tale. There was no prince on a white horse riding in to save her. There was no magic turning a pumpkin into a carriage. There was only a woman who chose life instead of death, who chose to help instead of turning away, who chose trust instead of fear. She didn't find family where she was born. She didn't find love where she once thought she was safe. But she found both in the place where she nearly lost her life. And sometimes, that is exactly how family is made. Not by blood, not by marriage, but by choice. By the moments that decide everything. By jumping into black water to save a stranger and discovering that the stranger will become the person closest to your heart. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the moving stories we bring you every day. We'd truly love to know how you felt about Brooke's story. Which part moved you the most? Have you ever stood before a decision that had the power to change your whole life? Please share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We read every comment, and we deeply hope to hear the stories that live in your hearts. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. Remember, you never know which small act of yours might change someone else's life, including your own. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you again in the next video.